technically Mexican and 3/4 American, but for 3 generations he's got that nationality. Great-great-grandpa headed south, whose kids as kids then turned around. It's not what the show's about, but it's why he's Mexican technically. It helps that he was raised in New Mexico, lived in Guadalajara for 2 years, speaks fluent Spanish with a bachelor's degree in language, and makes a mean taquito.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? I see Jacob Ironside's always in the chat. He's a cool cat, and for some reason we have not done a stream together yet, but we need to fix that soon. This is a special live stream talking about Discworld, something I've been wanting to do for a super long time, because I am currently reading through Discworld, and I frigging love it, and I've finally found some like-minded folks who might be able to provide a interesting conversation about Discworld. Unfortunately, the normal people I stream with on Sunday nights, I can't get them to start Discworld, and I just can't stop singing Terry Pratchett's praises. So if this stream can get one more person to start reading, then it will have been worth it. I've got 2 lovely new friends on the stream. We're joined by Gladfly from the regions of Canada, and Tankbeard, who I didn't have time to ask where he was from.
Atlanta, Georgia. So the
Georgia,
deep south.
okay.
Yeah, the swamp.
Right. Fun. So, Discworld. We don't have like a structure for this. I just wanted to chat because I'm 10 books in now, and I've just been dying to have a discussion. I've started making little videos on it, and I've kind of taken a break on the channel. I need to get back to my Discworld reviews, the reading Discworld out of order. But looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, well, that's always the question of what is the proper order to read the 41, as you were saying, books of the Discworld series, right?
41 Discworld books. And I said a sentence before the stream started. I said, I'm only 10 books in, and realized how idiotic that sounded if you were talking about any other series literally ever.
Yes.
But it feels like I've only scratched the surface, and I've read 10 books.
Well, it really is more about each of the individual stories is a complete story in its own, right?
Oh yeah.
But
Yes.
it's the Discworld series is about the Discworld. So you have multiple different main characters, right? You've got Sam Vimes and the City Watch, Rincewind and the Magicians, Granny Weatherwax and the Witches, Moist von Lipwig and the men of less than stellar moral upright being good men. He's the con man, essentially, that
In the
rises
Industrial
through
Revolution
social
books,
ranks.
yeah.
But then the Tiffany Aching stuff as well, and then there's all sorts of little individual ones that
There's a whole bunch of
characters,
one-offs that.
William de Word and I'm trying to remember the name of the fellow, but Pyramids is another one-off. And then you have the Death series, right? Like where Death is a character and probably one of the most beloved characters of the Discworld series.
So Gladfly has told me you've read the books, like all of them, at least 3 times, which that's crazy and awesome. So I'm looking forward to your knowledge, your wealth of knowledge. And Tankbeard, you're only like 5 books in, right?
Yeah, I've got 5 of them. I've seen all of the video adaptations, all the Amazon video adaptations. Something we've talked about before is that, it's funny how the same studio that made both the Discworld series, Amazon, I'm not sure if it's Prime or just whatever their studio is, and Wheel of Time. And as White Cloaks, I think we'd be remiss not to mention that we would all have a lot less to complain about, and maybe this whole thing wouldn't exist. So maybe it's a good thing that it happened this way. the Amazon studios chose to go with a fantastic adaptation for Discworld, and then whatever it was that Rafe is currently making with the Wheel of Prime. I'm about 5 books in. Death is definitely my favorite character. I do love Color of Magic, but I went through and watched Hogfather. I think is the one that they have adapted, and man, it is the whole the world, the magic, the world building, the fact that there's so much whimsy, and the fact that Terry Pratchett manages to work in sort of anachronistic ideas that go through all sorts of different times and technologies and eras, while at the same time, you know, keeping it feeling like it's a fantasy story. So even though there might be a giant submarine that they fish over the side of the disc to go and look at what's on the turtle, or if there's a turtle, or what's under the turtle, you know, even if there's a mechanical submarine that feels more at place with steampunk or sci-fi, Pratchett is so good that he makes it feel all encompassing in that fantasy world.
Well, that's a bit to explain to anybody who might be watching this who hasn't got Discworld or hasn't started reading it. Like, it's called Discworld, and the whimsy really comes out in the name because the world is a flat world carried on the back of 4 elephants standing on the back of a giant turtle, the great Atuin, moving through space, right? So it's steeped in so much of that mythological past of Earth, but in such a forcefully comedic manner. There's one book, The Fifth Elephant, which is about there's fat deposits on the Discworld where people mine fat. But the fat came because the 5th elephant that was supporting the Earth slipped off and fell off of the turtle and crashed into the world. And so, you know, it's just there's so many of those comedic little elements to it. And yeah, people mining fat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say Terry Pratchett is just amazing at coming up with puns and metaphors and similes that are like just hilarious and simultaneously like also deep at the same time, and consistent in his world building. There's so many times I just laugh out loud at his just stupid metaphors. But yeah, so the world was created as a joke. It's a flat Earth. But then he just takes it incredibly seriously. He ended up writing 4 books that aren't part of like the Discworld series that just explain the science of how this Earth could exist as a flat Earth. And so I technically, I mean, it's not part of the narrative, but there are 45 Discworld books if you count those.
You'll have to send that over in Discord after this, because that sounds like that's actually right up my alley. I love the maps,
It's
you know,
just
the
called
almanac,
the
all the
science.
terms.
It's called the Science of Discworld 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Of course it is.
I haven't read those. And you mentioned the adaptations, so that's where I'm behind. I've only seen the adaptation for Going Postal, and I believe I saw a short. I saw like a short YouTube video about Cohen the Barbarian, which was fantastic. It was really well made, but I've yet to see the Light Fantastic and the Hogfather. Right, those are the other 2 ones.
And Color of Magic.
And Color of Magic.
Yeah.
Oh, they did the Color of Magic and the Light Fantastic.
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
I said
I know they
that
did Color of Magic. I
meant to
know
say
I
the
watched
Color
it
of
last night.
Magic.
Yeah.
And I said the Light Fantastic.
So there are a number of different adaptations from different time periods as well. There's a bunch of cartoon ones.
Yes.
Now I'm forgetting the name of the book, but it's about rock and roll, introducing rock and roll into the Discworld. Soul music, yeah. And it's music with rocks in it, right? That one has it's full of puns and jokes and stuff, but it's very reminiscent of, you know, once again, real world history of the development of music in the real world, right? What's the other one is the parody of Hollywood, moving pictures.
Oh, okay.
Where that's, you know, somebody has developed moving pictures in the Discworld series, and so it's all about that. You know, the, as you're saying, the anachronistic sort of bringing all these sort of modern ideas and contemporaries through the means of fantastical creatures and magic, and putting it into like a Renaissance setting, with all the funny stuff that happens, right? And then all the different races and all that sort of stuff, the dwarves and the trolls being some of the predominant ones. But then you have, you know, vampires and werewolves, and in later books you have goblins and orcs, and there are elves as well. The main character in Soul Music is described as looking very elvish.
It's it pisses me off and like it impresses me at the same time. It's a great descriptor.
It really is. I'll say, first of all, Gadfly. Gadfly, I'm glad you're here. At least one of us has read all of this and read it a few times through. I feel like you're going to be kind of our Dane/Pips of the Discworld series, at least for this video. One of the other things I really like, because you mentioned the anachronistic side of things, is that even though it's an enormous series with 40 plus books, you really could start almost anywhere. And there's tons of lists that you can find. One of the things I really like is how accessible all the different stories are. Like, you know, I bought the first book, which is The Color of Magic, first. And I read it and it was good. And then I went online to say, okay, I like this book. It's funny. It's got a lot of the stuff I look for in fantasy. It doesn't take itself too seriously. What else is out there? And man, when you look online, it's like, okay, here's like the 7 different ways you can read the series. You can go by storyline, you can do chronological, you can, you know, follow different characters as they weave in and out of different stories. So it's got, Pratchett has a lot of selling points for me that really inspire me to try and make something similar in things I do.
The other reading order you can do, the reading order I did my first read through, was what book was available at the local library at that point in time, right? Because as you mentioned, they're all complete little stories independent of each other, and there are so many little through threads, right? Like the Sam Vimes series has a romance through it. It's a great romance between Sam Vimes and a lady. I don't want to spoil it for you guys.
It starts in the first book, though.
Yeah, but it's the romance and the relationship builds off of each other every book, right? And so you can read them completely independently of each other, but you can also get so much out of reading them in the order that they were, you know, released. So that's a very rare thing to find. Like the only other author I've ever come across that has anywhere that same level of each book is individual on its own but part of a greater whole would be P.G. Wodehouse with his Blandings Castle and Jeeves and Wooster series.
I haven't even heard of that. I'll have to look it up.
But that one's not a fantasy series. But I love the P.G. Wodehouse stuff, and it's same sort of thing, very comical, very lighthearted, very easy reads, right? But at the core of them, there is a lot of deep messaging and exploration, right? Like you look at some of Terry Pratchett books as well, deal with like very heavy topics, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, some of them were dealing with contemporary issues of the time that he was writing them. But I mean, like, they're contemporary issues, but they're also issues that spring up everywhere around the world at every point in time. There's a lot of these same problems, you know, like jingoism. There's a book, Jingo, and that's about that sort of concept of turning another group of people into an enemy, and the ostracization and otherization, to use academic terms, but the consequences that come from that. And once again, it's all wrapped up in this comedic, whimsical narrative. That's a Sam Vimes book, right? And coincidentally, there's a submarine in that one as well.
That's one of the Night's Watch ones.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm of the opinion that because there are so many books, and like you said, you can start anywhere. I think that everyone should read some Discworld, because I think that there is a Discworld book out there for everyone. Now, not everyone might not connect with all of Discworld, but like, I mean, here, I can pull it up. Like, I use this to help keep track of everything.
There it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got all, you've got the publication order, which a lot of people argue you should read in publication order, because it gets better over time, and you can see how his writing develops. And I think that's a good argument if you can commit to reading all of them, which most people, for most people, that's not a fair assumption, right? So I think if anyone's interested, you should just do a little bit of research, look at one of these charts, and just pick one that the plot sounds interesting, and it's guaranteed to be a good book. So, like, if you're a girl, maybe read the ones about witches, or Tiffany Aching, or if you're into magic, read the Rincewind ones, or if you're esoteric and like philosophy, read the Death novels, or if you just want like historian, just alternate history takes with magic, read the Ancient Civilizations or the Industrial Revolution books, which so everyone should just do some research and pick a book. And that's, I've tried to dip my toe into all the different threads. So I started with Color of Magic, and I think that's a horrible place to start. I liked the book, but it's definitely, like, I think it's the worst one that I've read so far, and because it didn't feel like a book, it felt like just a couple stories, shoved together.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But then The Light Fantastic is a direct follow up, and I loved The Light Fantastic. It's a story, so, like, I don't regret reading The Color of Magic, but it's kind of a turnoff. I read it a couple years before I did a deep dive, and I didn't come back to Discworld for a while because it was like, I was okay. And then the second book I read was Going Postal, which so you can start literally anywhere. I jumped halfway into the Industrial Revolution, right? And Going Postal is like my favorite book of all time. I think it's a perfect book. It's wonderful, and it inspired me to start jumping around. So I've read at least one from all of the paths, except the Tiffany Aching ones, because I read The Amazing Maurice, which starts before her character's introduced in his YA books. So I've read a YA book, but I've never touched Tiffany Aching. So I've got a pretty good spread for a feel of how Discworld tastes and all of its different flavors. But where I've gone the most deep is I had to read all of the Moist von Lipwig books, starting with Going Postal. I read all 3 of them because
Moist von Lipwig and Adora Bell.
he's like the greatest character ever written. It's so wonderful. So I had to finish all those, and then I've gone dipping through, and now I'm just gonna read them out of order because it's funny now, and I've committed to it.
And now you get the bit, so you have to go for it.
Yeah. And everyone gets mad at me in the comments. They're like, just read them in order. I'm like, it's too late. I'm already 10 books in. Sorry.
If you've read 2 of them out of order, then the problem is if you commit to doing one thing, there's going to be 15 more people that jump in. Like, no, you got to do Mort first. You got to do Mort. No, it's got to be Small God. It's got to be Going Postal, whatever. Like they'll just come in from every direction at you. At that point.
There hasn't been a single book that I've disliked.
No.
The one I liked the least, though, I think Equal Rights was my least favorite. I like The Color of Magic a little bit better than that. It wasn't bad. I just didn't connect to any of the characters until the very end when the main character of that series becomes more prominent and she kind of
Granny Weatherwax.
Yeah. She starts. Yeah. She's not even in the first part of the book, and she comes in and does stuff at the end. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is getting interesting now.
Yeah. Well, that's one of those things though where it's I have a hard time picking out which one of the characters is my favorite.
Yeah.
Main character, because Granny Weatherwax is such a fantastic.
Oh, she's wonderful.
Individual, very clever, intelligent, insightful. Carpe Jugulum is one of my favorite Terry Pratchett books. That's a Granny Weatherwax one. But at the same time, the Sam Vimes series is so simultaneously grounded and realistic in this bizarro fantasy setting. And Vimes is he's like a 80s detective character almost.
Yeah, he should be in a noir movie.
Yeah. And so some of his stuff is absolutely brilliant. And Jingo is a pretty fantastic one I mentioned before. But it just Guards itself is that's another book that if I'm ever looking at it on the bookshelf, I'm like, that's probably my favorite Discworld book. But then eyes shift over and I go to the Rincewind ones and how many times do I go through the series of books thinking I love this character so much, there is no character better, but then picking up another, and even the one-off characters are fantastic.
Small Gods was absolutely incredible. I don't remember the character's name, but the monk kid guy was hilarious. It was so well written.
Yeah.
It's funny too because, like you said, there's so many different ways to get into it. And actually, I really like The Color of Magic. I just rewatched.
I do like The Color of Magic. I don't want to sound like I don't like it.
It's an 85 instead of a 90.
Exactly.
Fair.
Yeah.
Well, so
I think I gave it a 7 out of 10, and then Going Postal was a 10 out of 10. I was like, wow. So.
Well, there's 2 things there. So, talking about having your friends who have a hard time getting into the series or who don't want to get into the series, they probably look at the length of the series and are like, oh my gosh. But, I feel like it's easier to get into these books because they're not that long. You could hold up 2 or 3 of these and, hold it up to a Memory of Light, and you're probably still reading a little bit more on the Memory of Light side with one book, versus a series like this. And the other thing that's really nice is, you were talking about the adaptations earlier, they have a great spread. There's a bunch of different stories in Discworld, but almost all of the major ones get touched on by one of those adaptations if you go through each of them. And it gives you sort of a taste for what each of the stories will bring, how it'll be different from the other ones. Obviously, the one that focuses on death with Hogfather and his granddaughter, I think it is, and all of that is going to be very different from running around with the tourist and the wizard in the Color of Magic and their luggage and just the crazy adventure they have. It is funny though, because you're right, that first book does break up into like 4 or 5 different little mini arcs
Yeah.
that are a little bit hard to follow because they don't really seem to have that much in common with each other.
It was very interesting. It didn't feel like a book to me.
Yeah. It's like a collection of short stories, really.
Yeah.
Particularly the part with the giant floating. See, now I'm trying to recall specifically what to call it. The giant floating area with the dragons and the riders, and they're upside down, and the whole.
They weren't imaginary. They were imagination dragons.
Yes.
That only exist if you believe in them, or something like that.
It's like Terry Pratchett was channeling South Park before South Park by several decades. At the Imagination Land, but here we are, what 20, 30 years before that ever aired, and he's knocking it out of the park in an era where you haven't even conceived of Game of Thrones or Wheel of Time or any of these other series yet by 10, 20 years. And if you look at some of the like Ellie Modesta, like, I mean, not to throw shade at the guy, but if you look at some of the other series, they're very straightforward and dry a lot of times. And then here's Discworld, and it's just a completely different experience.
It's just so incredibly charming. I loved the ending of The Color of Magic. Just the idea of scientists debating and trying to discover the gender of the space turtle that they're riding on. It's hilarious to me.
Yes.
So they dangle a ship like on a fishing line over the edge of the Discworld to get a peek. It's great.
And I love that in some of the resolutions to some of these stories, when you compare them to other fantasy series, the main character will have some moment of desperation and gain a new power up and be able to overcome whatever the obstacle is. Whereas Rincewind or whomever at the end of some of these books just sort of happenstance falls upwards into the solution in a way that it's totally in character and is hilarious. And that's what I love, is the fact that Pratchett can do humor in a way that still creates a full and completely satisfying fantasy story.
Oh,
well,
yeah. He never like tells a joke at the expense of the story. It never like pulls you out.
That's where
with the exception of the ending of Making Money, that pissed me off, and I was so impressed. I was like, you wrote this entire book to tell one pun, you jerk. I was like, oh, okay, but go on.
but I was just gonna say that like Terry Pratchett displayed the full capable understanding of what deconstruction actually means.
Yeah.
He took these stories apart with the typical tropes and all that sort of stuff, took them apart piece by piece by piece, and made little tiny tweaks to them, but then put the whole thing back together again. And so, like the story of Monstrous Regiment, Polly Perks goes off to join the army to find her brother, but women aren't allowed in the army, so she has to pretend to be a man, right? So you can already see a lot of these tropes falling into place. But the overall arc of the story is one where he just pulls the rug out from under you in such a way that you're left amazed. It's like you see those people pulling the tablecloths from under the cutlery and stuff, but it all stays there.
Yeah,
he does that to you, and you're just like, oh, what?
It's crazy because it's a ridiculous world. It's a flat Earth on the back of 4 elephants riding on a space turtle through space, and yet it feels real. There's nothing disingenuous about Discworld. Anytime I'm reading this book, I'm just like, I can imagine these people existing, and he toes that line wonderfully of comedy and satire and deconstruction, like you said, in a way that it feel. I don't know. I don't understand why it feels so real, but he's a
It's because
master at it.
the characters are entirely believable in
Yes.
their motivations, behaviors, actions. They're also entirely relatable, and even though they're dealing with fantastical creatures and situations and stuff, like Sam Vimes in the City Watch, you know, he's dealing with the dwarves and the trolls, but the dwarves and the trolls feel like actual groups of people. They feel like homogenous cultures
Yeah.
that are living in a separate culture,
Right.
and so trying to police that type of behavior, well, not behavior, but like that type of situation is real, and you get the interactions and the interplays, right? There's an entire story about the traditionalist dwarves coming into the dwarves that are living in the cities, and the internal strife that's happening because of that, and how that's affecting the population of Ankh-Morpork, which is another thing. Like the names of the places are also ridiculously silly.
Yes. As
But
are the directions and orientations of the world itself. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh
Yeah.
yes,
Hubward and Rimward.
Hubward and Rimward, and
and then there's two more too, right? That are counter directional or
yeah, it's counterspin and or yeah, because so Hubward is towards the
Mhm.
center, Rimward is toward the rim, and then clockwise and counterclockwise, but I forget the term.
and there's one that starts with like it's a W word of some sort that he throws a whole bunch of them in there and kind of sprinkles them in nicely. The other thing I didn't hear you guys say as a descriptor of the series and what makes it sort of stick together and feel really cohesive is that it's very whimsical, is a word I would really use for it. It's got not just a great sense of humor, but the whole world is imbued with whimsy.
Yeah.
And it's funny and charming, exactly, and whimsical to such a degree that it really stands out among all the other series. I mean, how many clones do we have of Game of Thrones? How many different
Yep.
series do we have that are just Tolkien but with different elves for some reason? You know, now they're blue or whatever it is. This series completely feels unique amongst other fantasy long-running series, especially. And with regards to the character believability, the way they can be built up, and the way that Pratchett does such a great job of making them feel like somebody you know rather than some character you're reading about. The only comparison I can really make, and this is sort of a far-reaching comparison, is the Full Metal Alchemist series, which is a manga series, a Japanese comic that has a great couple of anime adaptations. But the point about that is that the character work in that series is also excellent. And the character work here, I mean, I think probably it lends itself even better a little bit to adaptation on film than something like even the Wheel of Time would, just because there's so many visual puns that you can play with and show, where a more straightforward fantasy series, even something great like Wheel of Time, relies on the written word to evoke imagination about things we already know about. With Discworld, man, literally the end of a book could be that they're going to check on the gender of a turtle, like we talked about earlier, and they're fishing a giant submarine over the side of the turtle, over the disc. But you know, you got to watch out for the elephants, but you want to check on the gender, and you know, a whole team of scientists are looking around upstairs very stuffily, pointing at each other and looking at who to blame if it goes wrong and how to take credit if it goes right. And that is just spectacular character writing.
Yeah, no, I would love to see some kind of like Discworld cinematic universe that's not
Oh my
made by
gosh.
Disney, you know. But just to be able, I mean, because there's so many crossovers as well too. I don't think it could work as well. Maybe you could do movies. I don't know. It would be tough, but it would be very interesting.
You'd have to combine books, I think, for that,
Yeah,
like several. Yeah.
But
To an extent, a lot of what you will discover as you read more is characters pop up in different characters' stories, right? So
Oh, yeah.
Sam Vimes makes an appearance in the Monstrous Regiment one. He's not a main character, but he makes an appearance. He also makes an appearance in some of the witches stories, and then of course the time traveling monks show up in a bunch of different things. But then also at the same time, you have institutions within the Discworld itself that are expanded upon amongst all of them, right? So you have like the Assassins Guild of Ankh-Morpork, and that's something that comes up in a bunch of different places. The one of the main characters in Pyramids, he's the son of a noble of a nation that builds pyramids because pyramids are magical and important, don't you know? And he goes to Ankh-Morpork to learn to be an assassin because that's what noble kids do. But he has to come back because his father dies, so he becomes the new king and has to come back. So those institutions are constant thoroughfares throughout the entire story, and you have all these different little secondary characters that constantly show up as well, like Lord Rust of the Assassin's Guild constantly shows up in the stories. He's never an important individual in pretty much any of them, but he's always there. Ponder Stibbins is another character that shows up frequently, and the arch-chancellor of the Unseen University, where the magicians go, he's there, and the bursar, and the librarian, who's an orangutan because a magical experiment went wrong, but he refuses to be changed back into a human. And so, like, you have all these different little teeny tiny connective pieces that hold this web together, and that's one of those richness. One of those qualities of richness to the series is that complete and utter depth. You no matter what book you jump from one to the other, no matter what book, there will always be something where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that, or that reminds me of that, or
and that's why like my insane reading order has actually been really fun, because like I get these pieces randomly that start filling in. If you read it in order, like you kind of work from left to right, filling in this puzzle. But because of all these connections, like it's really fun to see these characters popping up in different locations. Like just following, the patricianer of Ankh-Morpork, Lord Vetinari, is just the most fascinating character of all time. He's a tyrant, and he knows he's a tyrant, but he's not like a bad guy. Like he just wants Ankh-Morpork to be a good city, and for him to be in charge of it.
Well, because he wants to be in charge of it because nobody else who would be in charge of it would make it good, right?
And but even the villains, they're written so well, and put so much time into these bad guys that are, most of them die.
Well, let me jump in right quick there. That a special shout out to, and if you haven't seen it yet, maybe I'm not sure you might have, you just thought the name was a little different. The Color of Magic adaptation that's on Amazon has Tim Curry as the head wizard, and I feel like that should be enough already to get anybody who's sort of on the fence about getting into the series to just say, look, it's Tim Curry. Everybody loves Tim Curry. Come watch him chew on the scenery. Come watch him rage around the set and go nuts and make incredible faces. Too. Yes.
He was so good in everything he did. He elevated Command and Conquer to a cinematic level.
I forgot about those, man.
Just the little cinematic commercials he would run, and you're like, this is amazing. It's amazing.
I will say, I feel like Rincewind is cast way too old, though.
with
In the
David
books-
Jason.
Yeah, it's not a bad casting, but like in the books, he's described as a lot younger than that. At least in the ones that I've read, he probably gets older. I assume.
I think he pulls
Well,
off the energy. So
Yeah,
I'm not
no,
as, you know,
It worked because he was insanely energetic.
yes. And his
He,
great facial, his face is, he's got a face for Rincewind.
I've
I
seen
think.
clips of it, but I haven't watched the whole thing yet. I need
but
to
just to pick up, I mentioned this in the Discord chat, but David Jason is known for being Detective Frost in a BBC, not a BBC, but a British show, A Touch of Frost, where he's, you know, it's a lot of it is really dark, and really really morbid stuff in the show in A Touch of Frost. But he's also the voice of Toad in the Wind in the Willows not claymation,
yeah.
but stop motion animation from years and years and years back. So the guy has such a fantastic range. But Rincewind also like ages rapidly because of his adventures, right? Like
yeah.
is I love the story of the wizard who has absolutely no magical potential whatsoever.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like the start of about 15 new series that have come out in the last 3 or 4 years across every platform you could think of. It's
But
like,
he just never
oh, he's a
progressed.
magician, but he has no magic, and what are you going to do about it? Meanwhile, once again, you know, Pratchett's been doing this for what now 40, 50 years ago is when he started the series, and he's been crushing it all the way up until his passing a few years back. And you know, people got. I feel like there is a great opportunity for people who have these big lists. For like, this is next on my list, and after that's this, and then I'm working in this one. I really need to get through all the classics. Like, well, this is a classic. You really need to get into the series.
So what I've been doing is I use Discworld as a palate cleanser.
That's a good idea.
So every other book I read is a Discworld book because I don't want to burn myself out, and I also don't want to like just finish and then be done.
Yeah, you won't run out.
That's that you've run into the one shortcoming I have in the Terry Pratchett reading that I've done. I cannot get myself to finish his final book. It's
Yeah.
it's a very good book. It's one of the Tiffany Aching ones. It's a lovely book. It's a lovely story. But you know, it's his final book, and so when I spent decades reading his material up until that point, right? And so whenever I get to that book, it's it's heartrending coming to it because it's like this is his last one. It's also, his early onset dementia meant that a lot of his later books he was writing with somebody as well. And so they don't quite feel the same, but they're still there. Like the core of them is still there.
Oh yeah.
And so it's hard to get through those last ones for me as a Pratchett fan and aficionado.
I could definitely tell that Raising Steam was losing steam a little bit. I loved it for the characters. Yeah, that was the second to last one he wrote, but it was a great story that didn't really have a good ending. It just wasn't as tight, but I loved reading it. Let's talk about that first. The idea of his Industrial Revolution books are fascinating to me. Because Discworld kind of started off as just him satirizing the genre, right? So he's like, okay, I'm going to do the Gandalf character, but he sucks and he doesn't have any magic, right? And then I'm going to do stuff about witches, but I'm going to just explain everything incessantly. He started off just playing off of these tropes and making fun of them, but Discworld just quickly just became something in and of itself, right? He's too good at world building, and so then he was able to satirize ideas and then like concepts, like, oh, I'm just going to take this concept and write a story about it, and it just happens in Discworld, right? And then he started satirizing history, which is like, I don't even know why you would do that, because it's insane. And it worked so well. He's like you said with moving pictures, I'm just going to write a book about Hollywood, and it's like invention, how it grew, but it happens in Discworld.
Yeah. Well, it's the other thing about that was also how almost parasitical it was.
Uh-huh. So I haven't read the first three. I started with Moist because I
But
I read Going Postal, and then I was like, well, I have to finish these. So I've read the last end of the Industrial Revolution.
but
yeah,
but yeah, so it's one of those things where he's taking moments of real world history,
Yeah.
and retroactively applying them to that sort of almost Renaissance era world, and kind of seeing how they interact, but also bringing a lot of the curiosities of those real world events, and the the surrounding characters and natures of those things, right? So like the truth, right, is about the printing press,
Okay.
but it's actually more so about uh, developing a newspaper.
Uh-huh.
And so yes, it's introducing the idea of a printing press to a
And remember, this is a fantasy book. But
yeah.
go on.
So it's the idea of
Exactly.
introducing the printing press to a late medieval, early Renaissance
Yeah.
setting, but also the idea of what a newspaper is, and how reporters and editors and all that sort of stuff operate, and how that type of structure of organization and how those individuals would react to being in a
Magical world. Like,
Renaissance era magical
how
world.
those technological and developments would work similarly to how they worked in real life, but how it would be different if it was on a
Yeah,
world
but
where magic existed.
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
also the idea of the reporter, though, the reporter going up to like Lord Vetinari and being like, "Can I quote you on that?" And like how would for lack of a better term, like a Venetian or how would a Medici tyrant from history react to a modern day reporter?
Yeah.
Right.
His stuff is, it like evokes a writing prompt just by knowing that his world building exists. It's almost as though you're reading a writing prompt for your own brain to run through and be like, well, what would happen if this happened? Like, what if there was, this situation and then just a shark shows up, or, just something off the wall, and how he would create puns or situations or humor and weave it all together. Uh, yeah, I'm absolutely with you. It's every time I read his stuff, it like motivates me to want to go sit down and say, okay, I can do puns. Let me try and do something like this, because this is sort of in my vein, and I would love to be able to put something out like one of these books. Easier said than done because he's a genius, but just the same.
Well, who would come up with the idea for a like vampire sobriety group, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
Yep.
that's good. Also, way ahead of his time in that, like, fantasy series. Typically, I can't think of. I can think of modern examples, but I can't think of any back then that let their worlds progress technologically through history.
Yeah.
Which is, a lot of modern authors kind of complain about that, and that's what Brandon Sanderson talked about. He's like, oh, I really wanted to make a world that started medieval, and then eventually
That's exactly what I
grows
thought it
into
was
something bigger.
Mistborn. Right.
And there are yeah. So Brandon Sanderson has done it. There are a couple other
I can't think of a
authors.
lot of other ones though. I mean, I
I
guess Robert Jordan did it in reverse, with
yeah,
the Age of Legends kind of,
Robert Jordan
but
did it in reverse. Gladfly had to go check on something. He'll be right back.
sure.
But I think I haven't read the second part, so I don't know if it's true. But I'm pretty sure the First Law, the second trilogy, goes through like a little bit of development in technology. That's a newer one, but I can't think of any old examples. Sometimes you'll have science fiction stories that start there, like steampunk, but that's kind of a modern trend too.
Right.
I can't think of. Maybe there's a couple, but I can't think of any examples that.
I think you'd have to reach into like comics or some other media that's not even a fantasy novel to
it's
get
a
there.
huge
It's not
risk.
really.
It's a huge
Yes.
risk too if you
Yes.
accidentally let your world grow and then all of a sudden, but I wanted to tell a story, but the world's different now. I guess you could just go back in time, but
Well,
it's a risk even in the sci-fi.
It's dangerous.
Even for sci-fi, it's a risk, and that's a whole genre based on technology. Like, I'm reading The Expanse right now as well, and they've got a 30-year time jump right in the middle of it, and it's wild because you're like, oh, that could really screw up the entire story. Everything could be far lower stakes. You could really burn your world to the ground just by moving it forward.
So
Yeah,
one
a
of the
lot of
things
people
I've
don't like that time jump in Expanse.
I actually quite like it, but I know I'm probably in the minority.
So one of the things that I've noticed about those stories that tend to have those technological advancements throughout the series or happening at points in it, they tend to jump way too fast as well.
And you don't get the stuff in between. Yeah.
So like an example would be what is it, the Last Airbender, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then the second one. There's like
Legend of Korra. Yeah.
It's like, how many years is that between the two series? It's like 70 years, but they go from being like a completely feudal society to a society that has cars and radios, and within like a span of 70 years. So it's like,
that does seem a little too fast.
A society that doesn't have electricity to a society with cars and cities is really a leap in 70 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I admire them for doing the shift, but I admire Terry Pratchett more for showing you how it shifts.
Yeah, the slow progress as well, because that's the other thing. Each one of the books of the Industrial Revolution storyline is one technological advancement.
Yes.
So they don't all happen or aren't all like thrown at you in one go. So
it never ceases to amaze me that a series like Legend of Korra or Last Avatar has so many problems, and I think the time jump might have been the least of the issues of that series. But you have the model already with something like Discworld. You've got a great setup for all sorts of things, and so it always amazes me when you have a series that comes along and it's like, oh, we're new and exciting, and we're the new standard, and then they just trip all over. They hit the first speed bump over something that 3 or 4 established authors have already shown you how you do it. Like this is the way you can make it work well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love the parallels. Like you can see, he's a huge history buff. Like he knows you can't write a book about the fake printing press without knowing about the real printing press, and the postal system and the development of I guess the clacks is telegrams, right?
To be fair, he comes across as an expert with magic too, and I don't think that exists. So, he might just be fantastic at pretending like he's an expert, even if he isn't. But I would agree he's probably a big history buff for the reasons you discussed.
He goes into the banking system, the postal system, the development of trains and telegrams. It's crazy.
Well, but it's also the bizarre little peculiarities that surround those things, right? Because going postal, right? Like
Oh,
One of the
I
big
can't stop gushing about Going Postal. It's
one
the
of
best
the
book ever written. Okay,
one of the big side stories about
he
that
invents stamps. Okay,
is
it's
the stamp collector. I've
so
man,
good. It's so good. I'm sorry. Go on. I'm gonna
but
get excited.
but just the notion of that type of person who would have a stamp collection. He put that character in the story before there were things such as stamps.
Yeah, and he was obsessed with pins.
He was obsessed with pins beforehand, and then stamps come around, and so he's like,
screw pins. Stamps are better.
although not before he has a fantastic moment of slamming
the-
his bag full of pins into the face of a gargoyle, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's not just a throwaway gag too. Like he uses the pins to invent the tear away stamps. Like,
Yeah.
Going Postal is such a good book. Um, and the whole it's also got the greatest pun of all time, and I might spoil that joke because it's wonderful. But um, the dang it, there was another point. Oh, just the fact that the main character is a con man running the
Yeah.
post office because he's essentially got he's under house arrest. He has an ankle bracelet on in the form of a golem with his blood that will follow him to the ends of the earth, so he can't leave, and he's forced to fix the postal service against a vastly superior Clax system, which is the telegram analogy. Um, and he's running the post office like a con man and comes up with the concept of stamps to rip people off, and it ends up just working. He's like, wait, if I just create a stamp that's worth money, then I can just print a bunch of these for myself. It's so good. It's brilliantly written, but also, like you mentioned, he's an expert in magic. The magic concepts in Going Postal alone are insane. And I'm not going to do it justice, but the way he describes that a letter, I believe he says a letter is like an open-ended window into the multiverse of magic, because a letter is potential magic energy. It has the potential to change someone's life. If you're going to offer someone a job or ask someone to marry you, that can change their life. And so it stores magic potential energy. And because the post office has been shut down for so long, there's a bunch of letters stored there, and a bunch of magic energy has been like growing for forever, and so a bunch of weird stuff start happening. And then the Messiah parallels, when they lift him up into the air, swirl around him, and chant "Deliver us," is the smartest.
That's fantastic.
I can't. That is the greatest joke ever written, and it's completely serious. I don't know how he does it. He's serious when he says that joke. I threw the book across the room. I was laughing so hard. It took me like 10 minutes to start reading again. Deliver us. It's the perfect pun.
And Going Postal's right behind it too, as a fantastic pun for this guy who's going nuts.
Yes.
Going Postal, Postal Service, which is it's, it is. You're absolutely right.
And even when he has throwaway gags like just inventing a new pie that's just 3 because that's easier.
The architect. Yeah, that's another thing. Oh man, what's his name? What's the architect's name?
I can't remember. The guy who made the sorting machine. He was trying to make an organ or something. He was trying to make something else, and they use it as a sorting machine.
Yeah, but that guy has a bunch of different buildings that he's constructed around Ankh-Morpork and in some other places, right? And they're all bizarre because the guy's math was so horribly bad that it was so advanced. Like creating pocket dimensions and stuff because of his Bloody Stupid Johnson, I think was his name.
Something like that. He was tired of writing out the digits of pi, so he created an alternate universe where pi was just 3, and it messed a lot of things up. So dumb. And it doesn't pull you out of the it works. It's internally consistent. So
yeah, well that's another thing too, right? Just his consistency of everything. Like when a character develops, that character has developed, and moving on to the next story with that character, they have taken on all the sort of stuff from the previous book.
Bloody Stupid Johnson.
Yes.
It's his name. Go.
But yeah, so the consistency that he maintained throughout those 41 books of the development of the world, the development of the characters, and absolutely fantastic.
That's his nickname. His real name. Yeah. So
yeah,
Tripp's got it. That's his real name, but everyone calls him Bloody Stupid Johnson. Yeah. I just verified it. Incredible.
And also just the lines that Pratchett brings out. Like there's so many quotable lines. Everybody knows the light a man, or give a man fire and he'll be warm for a night. Light him on fire and he'll be warm for the rest of his life. Everyone knows that one from that's a Pratchett.
I didn't know that, and everyone's heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. Then there's the a lie will run around the world before the truth has got its boots on.
Yes.
That's another one that Pratchett came out with. Then
That's Pratchett. Huh.
Yeah, Pratchett. Or maybe he was quoting from somebody else, but he throws those.
I believe it. That's the thing. He's so energetic in the way he writes and so whimsical, like we were talking about before, that like you can fully believe that he would, in the process of putting together this world and putting all this stuff together and all the words and chapters and books that he put out, that something like that would emerge from that mind. Like if the mind that makes Discworld, it does not shock me that it also comes up with, basically any of the ideas, no matter how fantastic the pun may be. He is that guy. Like he is the guy who is cranking out the humorous, great fantasy.
But he also plays on other well-known quotes as well, right? Like the pen is mightier than the sword, right? There's that comes up in one scene where there was a former patrician of Ankh-Morpork who's
I just read that one.
Everything has to be completely literal. And so the saying in Ankh-Morpork is not the pen is mightier than the sword. It's the pen is mightier than the sword if the pen is very, very sharp and the sword is very, very small.
Yes. Because there was a wizard or a scientist that put it to the test scientifically to test.
It was a former patrician.
That sounds right.
/ tyrant of the city, right?
That sounds like the plot to a book, right? Like that sounds like how he would start a book is, we had to find out whether or not it actually is mightier, and so now we have a cobbler involved and 3 or 4 other things, and we had to get somebody to test whether it's enchanted leather in the shoe. Who knows, right? We're talking about the shoes, talking about the pen. Like it's just.
Here's some good quotes. Tripp's got some.
Oh yeah.
But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time. And then, while a poor man could only afford cheap boots, would have spent $100 on boots in the same and still have wet feet.
Yeah.
Is that a quote? Okay, sorry. I thought it was a quote.
I think that bottom one is. She said,
Yeah,
the trouble with having an open mind, of course, is that people will insist on coming along and trying to put things in it.
Yeah. I've looked up a couple people's favorites on the internet, and I haven't read this one yet, but it's great. a certain character was to management what King Herod was to the Bethlehem Playgroup Association. Or her chest rose and fell like an empire. Which is, it's really good.
That's one way to say heaving.
I really like that one.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Tripp has explained the first one there. The Sam Vimes theory of economics.
Oh,
about
yes. Yeah,
why poor people stay poor.
Yeah. Or the one about the thief. Where is it? I believe this one's talking about where'd it go? The assassin moved quietly from roof to roof until he was well away from the excitement around the watch house. His movement could be called cat-like, except that he did not stop to spray urine against things. I'm crying.
And thinking about it, the only other person who really comes close in terms of great fiction mixed with humor would be Douglas Adams. Like, The Hitchhiker's Guide would be the one thing I think you could parallel side by side, despite the difference in lengths.
That's how I try and sell Discworld, because the brand of humor is very similar, and there's frequently like one-off jokes or one-off like
It is very typical
tangents.
English humor. Yeah,
I was like, it's a similar vein of humor, except he doesn't hate himself, and he's slightly he's I might just had a brain fart, but he doesn't hate God quite as much. Terry Pratchett was an atheist, right? I believe.
Yeah.
But he's not as atheist.
He created the god of evolution in the Discworld series.
Yeah.
That's that was a funny one, where the ultimate creature that the god of evolution came up with is the cockroach.
He's not as aggressively atheistic in his writing as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and obviously,
yes,
it's in a fantasy setting instead of a sci-fi. That's how I try and sell it.
I'd agree with that.
Quotes now. Stories of imagination tend to upset those without one. Yep. There was one quote at the end of The Light Fantastic that I can't remember, but I was laughing for a long time. I'll have to look it up sometime. If cats looked like frogs, we'd realize that what nasty, cruel bastards they are. Style, that's what people remember.
Yeah.
And you could totally see some character jumping in to use that quote about frogs versus cats to describe like why the way you present yourself is important. And like that would be the conversation he's having. And he just kind of interjects that line out of nowhere. And you're like, what? Why would you say that? But then it falls in line with whatever the character is, which is what's, that's I think the most impressive thing is, and I think Gadfly, you spoke to this, despite how many puns there are, despite all the humor, where he will sort of sometimes throw a pun that you weren't expecting to show up at that point in the story. Despite that, it's still 100% within the characters almost all of the time in these books. Like, I have limited exposure to the series, but I have to say, when I read them, the characters make perfect sense. There's nothing worse than a character that sticks out for one reason or another. But one of my favorite characters is Rincewind, just because he's completely within character almost every single time you see him on the page.
I like this one too. In the beginning there was nothing, which exploded.
I remember dying when I did read that one.
I believe that one's in The Light Fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, which is one of the ones I have read.
It's not worth doing something unless someone somewhere would much rather you weren't doing it. No, I absolutely love his writing. I just can't get enough of it. Oh yeah, you made that point for me that I was going to compare him to. You beat me to the chase when you said Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Well, there's just not a lot of comparisons. Like,
No, there's not a lot
you
of
know,
good comparisons. There's a lot of
it's-
people that are bad at it.
there's
Douglas
plenty of
Adams.
mid fantasy from the 70s and 80s that you could pull from, but there's not a lot that really stacks up, particularly when you're looking at humor. You know,
It's Douglas Adams and P.G. Wodehouse are the only two that come close to that same sort of charm, whimsy, humor compilation, and in different ratios, right? I mean, Douglas Adams has the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a trilogy in 5 parts, and the Dirk Gently detective series. The Salmon of Doubt, and I'm forgetting the name of the others. But yeah, and just the solutions as well that people come up with in those stories are quite real too. Like, yeah, they often the solution is a bizarre, like you stumble across it, but the characters' reactions and their determinations to it. There's one story that has like an eldritch horror type element to it. I don't want to spoil it for you guys in case you haven't read it, but so there's an eldritch horror that wants to take control of this child, and the main character and the child get brought into the dimension, and the main character decides, well, nothing in a street fight beats a half brick in a sock. So he takes his sock off and fills it up with sand, because that's the only thing he can do to defend himself and defend the child. And so he just starts swinging this sock around, smacking the eldritch horror with this sock full of sand. It's like there's nothing else the character could do at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so he came up with that solution. But even the description of it, right? Like, there's in a street fight, a half brick in a sock, ultimate weapon. And it's the ultimate weapon that saves the universe. So
it's also not that inaccurate. Like, I wouldn't want to fight somebody who had a half brick, like a sock with a half brick in it full of sand too.
It's a flail.
Yeah, that's not fun.
I was gonna say that it's not just the comedy too, because he writes these characters so believably too. Like, he also has genuinely moving moments in his climaxes. Like, and I was shocked at this, but the last one I read was The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents. It's literally a book about a cat and rats that can talk, who go around scamming people. And I cried at the end. The ending was beautiful, and it's about a cat and a bunch of rats. But it was a wonderfully powerful ending in a YA book. That didn't feel like a YA book to me, because it didn't treat the audience as stupid. It's just that the main characters were kids, and that's why it's a YA book. But it was wonderful. Also, there's a wonderful pun in that one. The grim squeaker is the Grim Reaper, but for rats.
Yeah, well, that comes from
That's good.
Reaper Man, which is a story where death is getting audited.
It's so stupid. That's so dumb. How do you say that with a straight face?
I feel like I would never want to play poker against Terry Pratchett. He would just crush me. Just,
you would never know if his reactions are reactions of joy because he's going to play you, or genuine joy because he's got a fantastic hand, or joy because he's just having a good time.
No, it is making money. literally the entire book is just build up for one stupid pun at the end. It's bad. It is a bad pun, but it's delivered so well that it's hilarious. I hate that book. It's wonderful. And I'm not going to spoil that pun because that's the only reason to read the book. Is the dumb joke at the end. It felt like reading Making Money felt like a Norm Macdonald bit.
That's it.
Then you're just like, okay, oh, okay.
Still pretty high praise. One of the
Yeah,
greats.
no, I liked it and I hated it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
exactly.
It's
quote.
one of those ones where you hate yourself for laughing.
Yeah. No, he does. He makes fun of you as the reader. He's a mean man. He's a mean old man from his grave. Just erotic, nothing kinky. It's the difference between using a feather and using a chicken. Just so many good lines. If anyone can look it up, there's a pun like right at the end of The Light Fantastic, where it's something kinky like that. Like he just describes a character. It was similar to like tired as a whore at dawn or something like that, but it was a spin on something like that, and it was so funny. But I just don't have time to look it up while doing the stream.
I was gonna say I doubt I'm gonna be able to get to it, but yeah, there's no way.
Yeah.
I don't know it well enough.
It was right at the end, but the whole of life is just like watching a film, only it's as though you always get in 10 minutes after the big picture started.
Her second comment is the end of that quote.
Oh, and no one will tell you the plot, so you have to work it out for yourself. Yeah. So like some of them are profound as heck.
Yeah. Well, when you have a good author, the author knows humanity, knows human beings and their foibles and their flaws and their quirks and all that stuff, and is able to play off of those and capitalize them. And Pratchett certainly knew all of that. So his style of prose is so contrary to the impactful messaging that he brings forward in his books. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, the whole series with Death as the main character, right? Like,
yeah,
that's another one of those ones where you're reading it and you can in various of the Death books you can feel the little dampness welling up in your eyes as you're reading it. And it's a story about death, the personification of death, going through trying to be a dad in some instances, right?
Yeah.
And it's like,
I loved Mort. It was great.
Yeah, Mort is fantastic. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, going back to the Hogfather again, like that story, you bring in the granddaughter, you kind of mix in the holiday metaphors in there as well, where people are celebrating a holiday and there's death. It's a wonderfully weird combination of storylines that don't feel like they would go together, except they do.
But that's another one that has these little tiny sprinkles of bizarreness that make you completely laugh, though. Like that's where the Veruca gnome is introduced.
Yes,
because the spirit of the Hogfather is trying to find a new host, and so the wizards who are trying to figure out what's going on, just one of them says, "Oh, So if we're not careful about what we say, we can bring in a new like mythical entity into the world, like the Veruca gnome who travels around and gives people Verucas. And lo and behold, the Veruca gnome manifests into the world to start traveling around and giving people Verucas.
Well, that's
I just
consistent with what he sets up in Small Gods. Like it's the idea that gods only exist if you believe in them. And Small Gods is great. It's about a god who he used to be big, and now he's only got one follower left, and so he's just following him around, going on an adventure. Wonderful.
oh shoot, was that Hogfather?
Got allergies, but yeah, no, he's consistent. You know, like that's like he uses his world building is incredibly consistent. He uses that same excuse to create this Veruca gnome thing guy.
But what's always amazing to me is like I have, like I said, a small pile of these books that I'm starting the series with, and I've jumped around a little bit in the ones I've got there, but
You, for the most part, read the first ones, though.
like if you were to throw one of the ones at me from 2/3 of the way through his chronological order of writing these books, I don't know that I would know that much of a difference. I'm not sure I would be able to pick out that it wasn't like the earlier ones I had read before. Like one of the things that it strikes me is looking at the other, some of the summaries, looking at some of the adaptations, reading some of the books, he seems to be, I mean, potentially until the last couple of books where he's winding down, he seems to be incredibly consistent. Like you were saying, he's,
No,
you
Going
can
Postal was one
count on it.
Going Postal is number 33, and it's my favorite one out of the 10 I've read. And then, Making Money, Raising Steam are the only ones after that I've read. You don't have a favorite, right, Gladfly? It's hard. It's incredibly hard to pick.
I probably do. But I'm very hard pressed to figure out which one it is.
It's tough. It's really tough.
I do like the Australia parallel,
which is in which book?
Oh,
you could have told me that was the name of the book, and I would have gone along with it.
The Australia parallel.
The continent is called 4X. I can't believe I'm blanking on the name. I cannot believe I am blanking on the name. But it's a Rincewind story. Last Continent. That's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Last Continent.
The Criminal Island.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last Continent. Yeah.
But yeah, that one is. I think right now that one. The stuff that happened in that book is the stuff that is coming to my mind most, and it's one of the Rincewind Wizard ones. But then I stop and I start thinking about the Sam Vine books, and the Fifth Elephant is fantastic. Guards is fantastic. Carpe Jugulum is fantastic. So I don't think I can ever pin down and say which one is my actual favorite book.
Well, since I've only read 10, for me it's Going Postal, followed very closely by Small Gods, and then Mort, and then Guards, and then the other ones. But yeah, it's tough. It's a tough choice. Do you have a favorite one out of what you've started, Tankbeard?
She's gonna hold that against you. Probably, honestly, it's probably Color Magic. I know that's, some people say it's the worst book in the series.
It's got some great stuff in it.
I just remember when I first picked it up, I'm like, okay, people say this is funny. Let me see what it's all about. And I'm somebody who really likes satire, puns, things that sort of play off each other. And while it is sort of a back and forth, kind of all over the place a story that doesn't focus as well as it might maybe could, it does have so much satire and parody. It's just bursting at the seams with it. And so that absolutely connects with me. And like I said, it's one of those things where it makes me want to get into the series more. I think we all can say there's several series we would all like to read if only we had, I don't know, 10 times as much time as we have right now. And so this is one where I'm like, I need to start peppering this in. I like the idea of using it, going back and forth between I read this book and then I read a Discworld book.
It really helps if you're reading like sci-fi. So I'm doing Dune right now, and they're great, but they're tough, and you got to be paying it. You got to it's like philosophy, and you've got to be paying attention 100% of the time, or it's all going to go over your head. So it's great to like take a break and read a Discworld book in between.
Well, in the case of what I am reading right now is the Cosmere. I'm finally getting through the Cosmere for the first time, and I'm on book 5 now. I just started the 5th book of Mistborn, Era 2, book 2, and they're all good books, right? Sanderson doesn't write garbage. It just really doesn't. But he does follow a very hilarious pattern where every book, the first 2 chapters are hard to read, and then the middle is good, really good, and then the end is good, but maybe a little bit disappointing. And then you go to the next book and it's the same pattern over and over again. And so I think it would be a good decision for me to break it up by having a different series that I jump to, because like you say, if I'm jumping to the Expanse, it's a little heavier. And then you're comparing a series where you have to know the world versus a series where you have to know the world. Discworld, the world sells itself. So it would be a lot easier, I think, to have like a palate cleanser or something to jump back to, or something to fall back on. That's a little more comforting.
And I've also been reading a lot of Grimdark too. So First Law and Gunmetal Gods. If you guys got to read Gunmetal Gods, I will recommend that book to everyone I see, because no one's read it. Super good.
I'll add it to the stack.
But it's like super dark, and I'm like, okay, let's laugh a little bit, and then we'll get back into the heavy stuff.
But once again, though, you say that, but like.
Yeah, and then I cry at his freaking kid's book. So,
yeah, that's the beauty of Pratchett, though. Like, he so very succinctly encapsulates human struggle and human endeavor within a charming manner.
Yeah.
So,
adaptation. The ones that have you seen them all? Or
I've seen a handful.
I didn't love the Going Postal adaptation. It was fine. I liked it because I'd read the book, but I was like, I can't imagine someone just picking this up and watching it and enjoying it.
I was that guy. I can speak to that. I was that guy. I've seen all of the adapted anything that was Discworld that was adapted to a live action adaptation recently within the last, I don't know, 15 years. The Amazon style adaptations they have recently. I've seen those. Here's the thing. I saw most of them before I started reading the series, because I was like, oh, that looks like something, like I've heard of this. Let me try this out. And they're all really good, but they all also are. It's almost a problem of how consistent the series is.
Yeah.
It's hard to differentiate in my mind the different adapted works, whereas some of the books make more sense to separate out. The adaptations very much so feel like, like we talked about earlier, the Discworld cinematic universe. Like, it kind of feels like that, where even if it's different characters, the world is very, very similar in terms of the way they portray it, which I think is a good thing, because it, you know what you're watching when you go into it. You're not surprised that now the tone's all of a sudden, super grimdark, like Game of Thrones would be or something. It's not throwing you like that, but it does make it to where I have a harder time remembering the specifics, but I can safely say there is not a single one that I've seen where I thought it was not at least good. Most of them are very good.
Did anyone watch that adaptation of Night's Watch? I haven't seen it, but I heard it took a lot of liberties. Like it made it like postmodern. And what's your favorite character from The Watch? He was like playing electric guitar and stuff. You got to look it up. I can't bring I hadn't read any of the Watch books yet, so I didn't watch it, but it didn't look like Discworld to me.
I was gonna say I don't know if I've seen one that's modern.
It's called The Watch.
Yeah.
8 episodes from BBC.
Oof,
I'm not sure
BBC.
which. I don't think it was adapting a specific book, but just some stories from the Night's Watch.
I'm just glad we have any
It looked
adaptations that
bizarre.
are. Frankly, I'm just glad we have any adaptation that's really, really true to the series and the feel of the series and the sort of staying faithful to the way the books are trying to come through the way the books are written. I think is the way to say it. To have anything like that is so great because we've seen so many series recently where
Yeah.
that is not the case. You know,
This
even
was
if
great.
I was gonna say even if Lord of the Rings is
Oof.
Yeah.
it looks like Guardians of the Why does that look like Guardians of the
I
Galaxy set in
well,
like Miami
I don't know. That it
Miami
was
Vice?
confusing. It was confusing to say the least. I think this is the vampire.
Are they trying to do The Boys but in Discworld? What is this
I don't
photo
know.
I'm looking at?
I don't know. It's fascinating. I mean, I don't know who the female character is supposed to be.
It also kind of looks like The Expanse and the way they're doing the colors and stuff. What in the world is?
It's probably Sergeant Angua.
Oh, yeah, okay. It's confusing though. to say the
See, that's a shame though, because that fella looks like he could do
Yeah.
a pretty good Sam Vimes
Yeah.
if he wasn't trying to look so
Miserable?
modern.
Well, no, because he is kind of a miserable character. Yeah, modern. Like, yeah. He could probably do a good Vines.
Like, where's his breastplate? Come on.
Yeah.
I have no idea what.
I mean, I love the suits of armor. Those like that. Maybe they're not quite true to the
those
the written
remind me of
words.
Doctor Who costumes,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, kind of. Well,
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna watch it now, though that I've read Guards.
Yeah, this one slipped beneath my watch. I think because it was on a different network.
Yeah, it wasn't super available in the U.S. or Canada, but I just remember a scene in the trailer. They had Vimes just like rocking on an electric guitar in like a nightclub, and I was like, okay, that's
It could be good,
that's
maybe.
different. Yeah, it was recent. It was 2020.
Well, because that's one of the things, though. It's like
I didn't hate going postal, the adaptation. It was fine.
Ankh-Morpork is like a modern city retroactively applied to the right. So they have like
Yeah.
bars and clubs and stuff, but they definitely don't have fluorescent lights and DJs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They have tourists. You know.
Tourists who teach people the concept of insurance.
Oh my God. Insurance.
Insurance.
So, for what do I need to read next? So I've gone Color of Magic, then Going Postal, Making Money, Raising Steam, Small Gods, Guards, Mort, Equal Rights, Light Fantastic, Amazing Maurice. I was planning on doing a death book next or another City Watch.
Well, if you want to,
What are the essentials? Search your soul. Search your soul. I think I was thinking of soul music or moving pictures or pyramids or sorcery.
I heard moving pictures is really good. So,
yeah, moving pictures is fantastic. I would pyramids would be something different from the rest of what you've read, giving you like a different part of the world, a different concept, and has a lot of very interesting aspects to it. So the pyramids might be one. Pyramids is where you get introduced to the world's best mathematicians.
Mm-hmm.
And they are very unexpected creatures.
I really liked the time the history monks' involvement in the small god story. it was pretty fun.
Yeah, they've got a number of ones. Yeah, Pip brings up a good Trip
Yes. Good
brings
Omens.
up a good point. My apologies.
Good Omens is
Trip.
on my list. Good Omens is on my list. It's not Discworld, but it's Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I've seen the adaptation, which I thought was pretty good. It was a good show. Good. I don't know if it's a good adaptation, but it was entertaining as a TV show.
Yeah, I thought it was very good. I agree with that.
I very rarely watch anything, so I can't speak to the adaptations because usually I'm incredibly disappointed. I'm a purist most of the time, but
I've yet to hear anyone say it was bad. But I also just love the idea of writing half of a book and passing it back and forth, chapter by chapter. That's fun.
But so
I've also heard that they're going to do a season 2 though, and it's just Neil Gaiman.
Yeah,
and I'm like, but Neil Gaiman's great.
How weird and dark is that going to get?
But
That's
he's
the
literally
real question.
only half of the book, and he's way too dark. Like you need Terry Pratchett's optimism is what like it balances the book. I don't know.
Well,
Terrified.
so me and my wife watch a lot of adaptations and things. Just when we have dinner together, we put something on to watch. Since we've only got a set amount of time, since I work down here, actually right here in this same chair. But like we watched the Sandman adaptation. And actually, I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was very different, but I thought it was pretty good for what it was. Good Omens was very good, I thought. But yeah, the reason that I got into the adaptations in the first place for the Discworld series is because I had some of the books. I had not read them yet. I knew how many there were. I knew there were a lot of books. And people said, this is a really good adaptation. And so I thought to myself, well, this might be a good way to sell myself, say, maybe this is something worth watching or reading rather. And then I watched The Color of Magic, immediately read it, thought it was fantastic, jumped to the late fantastic, then jumped through all of the other adaptations as I was then out of books. So I think that's probably the.
You're doing the what do I have available at the library approach?
Yeah, pretty much.
So if you wanted to go a completely different route, there's two other things that you can do that are Terry Pratchett, aside from Good Omens. There's his book, The Dark Side of the Sun, which is like an Isaac Asimov.
I do like Asimov.
Sci-fi story.
There's his Long World, right? No, I'm saying it wrong.
The Long Earth is that's another sci-fi series that he wrote with Stephen Baxter. I think
it's a fantastic premise, and I have not gotten around to it.
Yeah. But so those might be something worth. But I mean, maybe the Long Earth ones would be something that you would do aside of the Discworld stuff. But yeah, the Dark Side of the Sun is like a 1970s Isaac Asimov sci-fi story written by Terry Pratchett. So
I'm thinking something like almost like Childhood's End or something like that. One of those kind of twisted sci-fi stories. But then even with the name, the Dark Side of the Sun, he couldn't help himself. He still had to get it in there.
Yeah.
The Long Earth is fascinating to me because it feels like it solves the problem with multiverses. Because like anytime you introduce like a multiverse, the problem is who cares? It removes all the stakes. But like the Long Earth, I guess the premise. I mean, if you've read it, you probably can explain it better. But I've had a lot. I think I got it. I think I can do it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Watched enough YouTube videos on it,
The Long Earth. The difference is that like it's all. Humans don't exist on any of the alternate planets, and they're all like variations of Earth. You can go forward and back, and they get more different as you go more far away, but the only stipulation is humans are the only place humans exist are on the first iteration, and the premise was exploring how civilization changes when resources all of the sudden just become infinite, because you can essentially just travel to a new universe and just milk it.
Yeah.
Which is,
Once again,
that's a cool premise.
reminiscent of The Expanse to a degree. After they jump to the, I mean, I don't know if you guys have read that series or if this is a spoiler thing, but after the time jump, there's a very similar premise where it's what happens when humanity can have everything, and the answer is basically more of the same. Somebody is very greedy and evil and does very bad things, and tries to make everybody put everyone under their thumb.
That brings out the whole rat utopia experiment, where they crammed a whole bunch of rats into a place where they had enough food and activities and water, more than enough, but because of the close proximity to each other, you had the two types of rats: the ones who got ultraviolet, like Clockwork Orange ultraviolence, and then the beautiful ones who just sat and preened and masturbated. That's all they did.
They did Idiocracy.
Yeah.
Nobody thought that was going to be a documentary, and yet here we are.
We're not there yet.
No.
If we take it as prophetic writing, we can alter the course.
I don't know if we can get away from Brondo. I'm just not sure it's possible at this point. That's one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah. But yeah, so Terry Pratchett.
I'm definitely going to look up the dark.
If you're doing another Discworld thing, Pyramids might be one that gives you another different perspective on the Discworld, but it's more of Terry Pratchett Discworld, so it's great. The villain in that one is fantastic. It's like an actual complex villain, and the the conflict that is created by the king's death is a very fascinating one. It's obviously it's talking about, it's making a play on Egypt, and particularly the Egyptian royalty and nobility, and that the concepts that they bring up, and and it's got some absolutely fantastic characters and scenes in it. So,
well, I've just loved everything I've read from Discworld. I've also I haven't gotten some of my friends to start reading it, but I got my sister and my wife to both read Going Postal, and they're hard to please. Specifically when it comes to comedy. Like I'm an improv comedian, and my wife hates my comedy. So, but she loved Going Postal, and I've had success recommending Discworld to people who don't like reading. I do have a friend who got way into Discworld, and that's like all he's ever read. But he hates getting on camera, so he'll never come on my show.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the first my first exposure to Terry Pratchett decades ago. well, maybe not quite decades ago, but well over a decade ago now. Actually, about 2 decades ago now. Just reading in the library because I wanted to skip school, so I went to the library and picked up books. And Terry Pratchett was one of those ones. And I think I got in trouble that day because I didn't come home until late.
Oh, because you couldn't check it out. You had to read it at the library. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, I was supposed to be at school, so I just sequestered myself in the corner of the library and started reading.
Got it.
Discworld was school that day.
Yeah. Well, I probably learned more from Terry Pratchett than I ever would have. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I've gotten people into it is generally the adaptations can draw people in because people are, for whatever reason, we like to read. I've become since basically the pandemic really kind of drew me into reading a lot more. There was not a lot to do when I worked from home. And so I said, well, I've got all these books that I read years ago, and I'd like to get back into them and pick them back up. I'd like to actually finish The Wheel of Time because back then I'd read it twice up to book 5, and then, fallen off for like 3 months, and you come back, you're like, I have no idea what in the world is going on in this book right now. And so coming back to it, picking it back up, it's great. But for a lot of folks, I think drawing them into a really well done adaptation can be a great way to draw them into the book series as well. I know it's not going to be an exact replica 1-to-1, what a lot of folks would like, but I think if you throw Hogfather or The Color of Magic at just about any fantasy fan, if they haven't read the Discworld series, they're probably going to come back to you and say, okay, that was wild. Where did that come from? What's the book series? I need to read this.
If it's not just hot garbage like Rings of Power or Wheel, not to bring up Wheel of Time again. I've said this before, I've literally had friends stop reading The Wheel of Time because of the show.
That's a tragedy.
Yeah. And I forced my wife to keep going, but she said it ruined the books for her.
That's probably the worst condemnation a show can ever get.
Because you have to get all the crap out of your head, all the junk that goes into your head from the adaptation. You have to unlearn it because you're like, wait, what do you mean you can't AoE heal? What? And then that's the thing for me. That was the one where we were watching it together, and she just finished book 2, The Great Hunt, and she's listening to them in audiobooks, and she was like, what? She's like, they can't do that, Cam. No, they can't. No, you're right. You're 2 books in and you know better,
I was still in the honeymoon phase. It took me. I was ignoring a lot of the flaws in the Wheel of Pride just because I waited for so long for a good adaptation. It wasn't until the episode where the Amerlin seat makes Egwene swear fealty on the oath rod to her, which is
among other things,
which is literally what the evil character does in the middle of the series that causes a civil war.
Not to turn this into a Wheel of Time series. That's awful.
Didn't even and they didn't realize that they were making the good character do such a horrible thing.
Right.
And I watched that episode, and I woke up in the middle of the night with a heat sweat. And I didn't notice when I watched it. I woke up in the middle of the night, popped off the pillow. Oh no! Wait a second! I forgot that part of the books. And then everything,
Not to toot my own horn here, but I knew the Wheel of Prime was going to be garbage.
Shut up!
As soon as I saw the pictures of the Aes Sedai rings, I was like, those are horrible. Not only are they just so bad canonically to the story, but they look terrible too. So if that's what you're designing, an iconic item. Like the Aes Sedai rings in Wheel of Time are iconic to the story.
Mhm.
It's the perfect example that shows that the writers think that they know better than I'm gonna say Terry Pratchett.
Robert Jordan.
Robert Jordan, thank you. Terry
It's
Pratchett.
it's akin to all the Force powers in
Because
Star Wars, the sequel
rings,
trilogy. Like,
the ring, it's just it's just the snake eating its own tail, the Ouroboros, and that's it, and it's simple
Yep.
and it's good, but they wanted to make it haughty and better, and don't even realize like the rippling consequences that will happen to the story because they thought they could do a better job in just designing a set piece, but it has so much to do with the story. But we should probably
it's what
stop
happens
complaining
when you
about the Wheel of Time.
it's what happens when you let people who think that Harry Potter is the pinnacle of fiction,
Ugh.
write the Wheel of
Well,
Time. I mean,
I mean-
because you have Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, and, oh, these are my houses. Look at my rings and everything else, and not that.
Back to better things. Terry Pratchett
Terry Pratchett.
actually covers that type of stuff in moving pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Like, believe it or not, he
He criticizes Hollywood and moving pictures.
yeah, and it's fantastic. Like the nature of the the movie star and the movie studio and the studio's desire for control and influence and all that. That's all there.
I need to read that one.
And the pseudo religious nature of Hollywood as well is part of that story. So that is a fantastic story, but maybe that's the one you should read next.
It's one of the ones that I have on my phone ready. And I have a few of them I can choose from depending on what mood I'm in when I finish. If I'm coming off a Dune book, I'm probably not going to go into a death series because I don't need more philosophy.
Which Dune book is it that you're on now?
I'm on Children of Dune. I've got an hour and a half left because I do audiobooks now because it's the only way I can read with kids. And also I'm dyslexic.
Yeah. You're not likely to read Dune to kids. So.
No. I've got a whole backstory. I used to read all the time as a kid. I read Ender's Game in elementary school, despite my dyslexia, because it was so good. High school ruined reading for me because they made me read a bunch of sex books that were disgusting. They have sex with cows in Beloved. It's a horrible book. Why would you give it to high school kids? I'm sure there's a deeper meaning for who gives a crap.
It's shocking and provoking. And
I'll say you're asking all the right questions there. I just don't know that we want to get into the answers.
Anyway, so I stopped reading and spark noted through college until Brandon Sanderson, as someone recommended him, I started reading again. And so I picked it up, but I'm still just super slow. And so in the last couple of years, I've started doing audiobooks. And this year, I have read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 22.
Drum roll, please.
I've read 22 books this year. That's like
That's a lot.
That's the same as I've read in my lifetime.
we're
I've burned through. Yeah, I've burned through quite a few of them, but I'm probably in the 12 to 13 range for the year so far. To be fair, some of those are also Sanderson, so maybe half a book.
I envy the reading for pleasure. Being in academia, finishing up my masters and stuff. Like, well, some of the stuff I'm reading is fantastic. Like, I'm just gonna grab these books that I picked up from the conference I went to.
I think you told us about this also in the Discord. You were talking about this. Yeah.
A History of the Crusades by Stephen Runciman.
Okay, that sounds fun.
The whole set. So that's reading through these. This one is not a book that you read, but I have to go through it regularly. Dizionario di abbreviature latine ed italiana.
That does that
Is it
that
a
doesn't
translation?
sound fun.
So what this is it's a list of abbreviations of Latin. So when you're doing
Yep.
paleography, reading Latin texts, they abbreviate everything. And then, of course, a proper Old English grammar book. So these are the things I've been reading for pleasure, aside from the stuff I've been doing with the White Cloaks.
What's your thesis?
I'm doing a summation of the current academic coverage of the earliest surviving mystical alchemist.
That sounds interesting, actually.
It's very fascinating stuff to me. To me, he's actually more of a comprehensive ethical philosopher, and alchemy is sort of his process of doing that. But he's the first. His texts that we have are the first historical alchemical texts that are surviving.
And this is different from The Alchemist, the book, right? The
yes.
novel. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm making a joke.
But he's grossly understudied for being the first mystical alchemist. But he's always referenced by everybody, but very few people actually study his stuff. So I'm like compiling all the study that has been done on him, and putting it together and being like, look, here's what we got, and here's what we need to do. But yeah, so I do a lot of. Hang on a sec.
That is a practiced hand at getting a book out of a pile of books.
The Corpus Alchemicum Arabicum, the Book of the Keys of the Work, the Kitab Mafati Asa'ana by Zosimos of Panopolis. So this is an Arabic translation of his text. There are also Byzantine Greek translations of his text. This one's pretty great because it's got, on the one side, on the one folio, it has a picture of the page, and on the other, the translation.
That's really
cool. What was it written in originally?
Originally, it was written in Greek in the 260s. So a lot of time has transpired from that point.
Trip says we need to call you Mr. Intellectual.
I would not be averse to being called that. I've been called much worse. But
all those Crusade books look fantastic, fascinating though. Has anyone done like a good like historical fiction account of the Crusades, or like a fantasy equivalent or analogous? I'm sure someone's done it, but I'm struggling to think of a good.
Well, Sir Walter Scott did Ivanhoe, which is a fantastic series, but that's not about the Crusade itself. It's about somebody coming home from the Crusade.
Right.
There probably are quite a few. So
there's just a lot there.
Yeah,
like a good series. Yeah. I pretty much exclusively read fiction because I like it.
I deal with sort of a chat system all day, working with spreadsheets and other things like that. And so if I have the opportunity to read something that doesn't come in an Excel spreadsheet or doesn't come in a chat box or Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever, then I'm all about it. And I mean, to be fair, I'm also much like you. I am all about fiction. If it doesn't have a dragon, if it doesn't have a spaceship, if it's trying to tell me about some story that happened 400 years ago, that's great. If it's got a wizard, I'm there. But so you said the Alchemist. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. The history of that would be fascinating to me, even as it is something that is drawn from history.
Well, for me, the thing that really gets me with fiction, the reason why I love fiction stuff and why I'm Gadfly fiction, is that fiction allows you to explore the depths of human nature, human character, external to the context of the world and the current context, right?
Yeah.
So you can do analogous things and all that sort of stuff, but being set in a separate world, a separate universe, allows you to deal with concepts without carrying on the baggage from real world, right? So if you do a story of of slavery or whatever, you can do that story in that world without all the baggage of real world slavery that gets brought into it if you're doing a story about slavery. Just as one of those big concepts.
And that's why I can't stand when people are like, everything is political. It's like, no, it could just be for fun. It can just be a dragon that, befriends a wizard that finds a flying horse and they go have an adventure. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to learn something about a system of government that exists in the real world by reading a story about, a bunch of mice that live in an abbot, like the Redwall, as an example.
But
So
it lends to a lot of self-examination too, though. Like once you remove like the real world context, I think you can do more examination of self.
Yes.
When you're seeing it in these fantastical worlds where suddenly our entire morality just doesn't exist anymore. It's a whole different history. You can see how like atrocities are human nature and stuff like that. That's why I like fiction.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It can be a great it can create great allegories for things that have happened without directly pointing to them or even making a story out of something that may have actually happened, but doing it in a way that's unique to the story that's being told.
Or removing all of the real world tension from a situation, tell a story about slavery. If you try and make it historically accurate, it's going to obviously bring emotional context. But if you strip it and paste it into a fantasy world, you can actually theorize about it and get people to think more. Have I been saying Gladfly? Have I been saying that word wrong my entire life? I've always said analogous.
Yeah, analogous is how I say it.
Is it analogous?
It's analogous.
It's analogous, but it makes sense though because it's an analog, so it's analogous.
I was combining two different words into one word without realizing it at that point in time.
Well, you said it with such authority. I was like, oh no!
And you said, "Hey, you combined two words."
Reassess my entire life.
Well, and you took two
analogous?
words, combined them into one, and it was still the right word. So or it was still a word rather. You took a shot and you didn't miss, which is what you always want to do in that situation.
I was trying to do analogy and allegory, right? And so those two words together fused into something somewhat recognizable.
It all worked out in the end. So
yeah.
Well, when you're talking in front of a class, you just keep on talking. because who are those idiots to question you, right?
Well, you made me question my whole life.
That's not true. I'd never doubt my students.
Oh, come on. We're all fantasy readers. We all go through fantasy series. Surely there's like 5 or 10 different locations in every book you read where you're thinking it's I thought it was Tayar, instead of Tyr or whatever. There's a million of them, Aes Sedai, Aes Sedai. I mean, there's goodness. You could go through the Wheel of Time. You could go through Discworld. More
Well,
Pork is probably,
That's the benefit.
know.
That's the benefit of audiobooks is you get the pronunciation. The problem is when you're trying to Google it, you don't know how to spell it. And the worst example from the Wheel of Time that I always bring up is the Damani and the Damani.
Yeah.
There's a country called Eridaman, whose people are referred to as the Damani, and it's spelled differently. And then there's the slaves that the Shanchan use, also called the Damani, spelled differently. And I had no idea for like 6 books.
That's so interesting. I have not listened to the audiobooks, so I didn't even know that that was like a concern.
No, it was so confusing because I was like, I didn't think the Shanchan were in this part of the world. Why are there Damani here? It's so confusing.
So they're pronounced similarly, is what you're saying.
It's exactly the same.
Oh wow! I thought it was Domani and then like Domine or something.
No, it's Damani.
It's in italics. It's in a it's a fantasy word in italics.
Well, sometimes they pronounce things differently too. Like
Right.
one of the Forsaken, Kate Redding and Michael Kramer, they each have like 3 different ways to pronounce it. I believe it's Mogideon. It's Mogideon, Mogadine, Mogadian, and like the and it's so inconsistent.
Nynaeve is one where I had no idea, as my cat is viciously attacking my camera stand here. If you're wondering why it's constantly moving around, there's a cat that's attacking the legs, as they do.
Sweep the leg, right?
All of them. There's 3 legs. It's going for all 3.
But I just like to think that I'm following the Vorin tradition of not, because I'm male, I'm not allowed to read, so the books must be read to me.
By another slightly less masculine man.
And then Dalliner has to go and ruin all that, so whatever. Well, this has been super fun, guys. I think we've exhausted at least our current discussion of the Discworld, but it's just such a wonderful place that I can never wait to get back into for a little bit.
To reconvene after more books have been read by you guys.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do another one of these. It'll probably be a while because I get through them slowly.
That'll give me time to catch up, I think, which would be nice. I got to get through the rest of Mistborn, then I probably want to finish The Expanse. Finally, I lost a book in the middle of the series, and so I had to basically buy a new book to replace it and then find where I was in that book. So I'm on book 8, so I'm very close to the end of it.
I'm sorry, we're not allowed to stop because we didn't discuss the sapient pearwood.
Trook's been talking about that since before the stream started.
Oh yeah. It's got legs.
It is a thing to behold in the video adaptation.
The luggage is made out of sapient pearwood.
Yes.
So that means that there could theoretically be other
pearwoods.
It begs the question:
so
hands?
There could be luggage. There could be wardrobe. There could be Chesterton. All made out of sapient pearwood.
I mean, you could build a house out of it in theory, and then you'd have hands everywhere.
Build a person.
Yeah, I think Bloody Stupid Johnson would think that sapient pearwood would be a great building material for a house.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how he managed to do all the fantastical feats of engineering he's done.
There's got to be. I mean, it would be right in the vein of like that's the origin of Pinocchio. Is Geppetto just accidentally used sapient pearwood?
If you guys watched any of the animated Tick,
No, no.
I have not.
oh, it's great. The Tick, it's like a superhero, but he's like it's comedy stuff.
Oh, yes, yes. Sorry, I thought we were talking about something
heard
related to
it's great.
Discworld, and my mind was yes.
I've heard
the Tick is
it's great,
fantastic.
and I've heard people
Yes.
like the live action as
Yeah.
well.
Well, there's two live actions actually.
I didn't know that. I just knew the one with the guy who does Emperor's New Groove.
Patrick
Animated Tick
Warburton.
is
Yeah,
Patrick
that's
Warburton.
that's the first one. The second one is an Amazon thing, I think. But there's one episode of the animated Tick series where he and Arthur, his sidekick, break up their partnership, and the Tick is distraught, and he sees because they have a craft night, right? And Arthur wants to go have a date, and so the Tick sees a face in the piece of wood that he's carving. There's a little boy in here. I'll get him out. And so he goes through this montage of him doing carpentry stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next scene is there's just a plank of wood with a painted on face and like screws with arms nailed, or arms screwed onto the plank of wood. And he goes around trying to be a superhero. And at one point he throws the things, get him, little wooden boy, and throws the plank of wood at a villain. It's the Tick's animated series is great. It's fantastic.
If you like Freaknik, it's I think that is right in the same vein. Freaknik and the Tick are both.
Freakazoid.
Yeah, not Freaknik. Freaknik's
Yeah.
Freaknik's actually another good animated thing, but it's totally different. It's there was a musical that Cartoon Network put together forever ago about the Atlanta hip hop festival called Freaknik. I want to say it has the voice of T-Pain and Snoop Dogg in the musical, which is kind of wild, and then it's very, very funny, oddly enough. Wouldn't think it would be good, but yes, Freakazoid and the Tick are very, very similar tastes in terms of their sense of humor, I think.
Earthworm Jim is kind of in there as well.
Yes.
But the Tick animated series, it's hilarious. It's a lot of fun, and it's pretty darn kid friendly.
Yeah, sounds fun. Yeah, kid friendly. That's oh goodness. Half the shows on Disney Plus are not good for kids.
Yeah.
The new Star Wars kid show. My kids started watching it. I'm like, nope, we're done.
See, I didn't even know
for the
there was
record,
one.
I don't pay for Disney Plus. I'm mooching off an account, and and I would get rid of it entirely if it didn't also have all of the Disney classics. Like, I don't own them, so like it's a good resource to let my kids watch the good Disney movies. Back when Disney was based.
The ones that made a little less money but had a lot more heart.
Yeah. I don't think
Heck, the
they
ones
less,
I'll still watch.
They made less money in theaters, but I think I think if you did the math, I think they made way more money with DVD and VHS sales than like most films ever make.
To be fair, that's kind of their bread and butter, though. They were like, okay, the movie's out, but now you have to buy it because you got kids. So,
and with like
and the
Vault,
sequel,
the Vault stuff, where it's a time thing. Like, those movies weren't supposed to make money in theaters. So
Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, all the sequels,
I didn't watch much stuff. I seem to have not watched much stuff my entire life, which is probably for the better. But the stuff I did end up watching was usually more along the Don Bluth type of things. Like as a kid, the Secret of Nim, the Black Cauldron, and
oh yeah,
Fievel Goes West, An American Tale, those things. Like
So I watched Five Goes West, but the first two you said I didn't catch until I was an adult, until
Oh,
about
they-
10 years ago. And
Yeah.
oh
Dude, the
man,
Black Cauldron is so
oh
criminally,
man.
criminally underrated. It's so good. And then
Well, that and Hercules, surprisingly. If you want to talk
Yeah.
about an animated movie that's underrated, man, that thing has some humor that really holds up when you watch it again as an adult.
It's not underrated in my sphere, being classicists.
Fair.
They all love it. But yeah, it's pretty good. But yeah, the Secret of Nim was just
I love that one.
terrifying
book.
as a kid.
I love the book. It's so
Yeah.
dark.
Oh, and Watership Down.
Yes.
I've heard of it and I know about it and I haven't seen it.
It's Redwall on steroids. If you've read the Redwall series.
Redwall.
Yeah.
I wanted to get into that as a kid, but I was dyslexic,
It's
and I
worth
read the
getting
first
into
two.
now. It's great.
read the
It's
first
great.
two and they were fantastic.
Well, along with Robert Jordan and along with Terry Pratchett, and I guess Douglas Adams fits in this category as well. Brian Jacks, who wrote that series. There's a couple of authors that, now that I'm able to go to conventions on my own as an adult and travel around and do this stuff, I've gotten to meet people like Brandon Sanderson and like Jim Butcher, and it makes me appreciate getting to meet them because I know like some of these guys, you just miss them and there's no going back. So you appreciate them when you get to see them and meet them in person, and look forward to more of them hopefully popping up and not getting too indoctrinated in the whatever it is that's going on right now.
Dude, the fact that they've never made like an animated Redwall series just makes no sense to me.
It would be gangbusters as a kid show. It would just slay.
It's the perfect kid show. Make an animated Redwall.
Double check that. I think they may have.
Well, it wasn't. I haven't seen it.
I might be thinking of something else, but I think they may have done, or maybe they've done like
It may be a short series or
a
something.
film or
Netflix
two or
is
something.
adapting it.
Ooh.
Which I mean, I don't know. They've done good stuff.
We've gotten to where we're like,
It's
which one's it gonna be? Netflix.
Are we going to get?
I mean, it's got to be. They're not going to do live. They're not going to do like the Disney live action Redwall, right?
Is it going to be the Last Airbender, or is it going to be Legend of Korra? Which one are we going to get?
Oh man. What was the guy? Martin
the Warrior.
Martin the
Moss
Warrior.
Flower. Oh yeah, I read all those books as a kid. I still have them.
Yeah,
I have them in the next room.
I read Redwall and I read Mateo, and I loved them. And then the library didn't have a whole lot of others. And
if people are looking for another good YA series that's about 20 to 30 books long,
it's big.
Like you said, you've read 2. There's about 30 of them, and they're all pretty good for being what they are.
Same percentage that I've read into Discworld. Okay.
So there is an animated Redwall movie, just one from 2000.
I think I've heard of it.
Okay.
I don't know if I have no idea if it's any good. I'm almost afraid to watch it.
Well, it had to have bombed or not gone to theaters at all, right? When there's
I don't know if a Redwall movie would have gone to theaters in 2000 though, just to begin with. It doesn't strike me as something that would make it into a theater.
7.8 on IMDb, 71% on Rotten Tomatoes.
It has 3 seasons.
3? Oh wow!
Of 2 episodes each.
So at the end of the stream, we've blown ourselves out with knowledge we did not have. They're just learning in real time.
Though? Is it good?
I mean, 7.1 and 70% is probably good.
Yeah, 7.8 on IMDb, 71 on Rotten Tomatoes.
I may have to check that out because I have read all of those, and like Salamandastron is one of my favorite books, even though it's aimed at like 6th graders, 7th graders, somewhere in there. It's just the guy can really write. He can write accents and culture better than almost anybody I've read, even in the world of adult fiction.
Oh wait, I think I've seen this, or at least parts of it.
Next week, Redwall stream.
All right. Well, I mean, it's on Amazon, not free. You can buy it. Wait, no, there's 25 episodes then. Okay. What's the catch here? I gotta do a deep dive. There's 1 season. There's 2 seasons. Brian Jax.
Yeah, Brian Jax is great.
GQ?
Jax.
GQ? I'm gonna
He's
say
American from South Carolina. He wanted to do his own thing, and do his like a fantasy series with animals, with American sort of undertones rather than the sort of
Yeah.
European roots that people that usually dominate that genre.
Well, they did a TV show, and I'm gonna find a way to watch it.
I think I might too, actually. That seems pretty interesting.
Oh, I'll have to check out the Netflix series eventually, out of morbid curiosity.
Hope it's not by Kevin Smith.
Oh man, you got to bring the whole stream down, don't you?
I hope he doesn't, He-Man it or whatever. She-Ra. Ugh.
Well, that was he did the He-Man.
Okay,
The She-Ra was done before that.
Okay, so the way on the streaming platforms, it's listed differently, and so some of them merge seasons together. But they did 3 seasons. They did Redwall season 1. They did Matameo season 2.
Matameo, yeah.
And then they did season Martin the Warrior season 3.
That lines up. That's probably one book each because that's the name of
Yeah,
the first 3 books, I think.
Yeah, it is.
And then I think Moss Flower is
Martin
the
the
next
Warrior
one.
is a prequel, but yeah.
Yeah, they chronologically written that way.
1999, 2001, 2002. I might buy those, like the physical media, because that looks cool.
And you can almost certainly watch those with your kids. Like that's the great part about that. Like it would be a real challenge, more so than making the Wheel of Time into a really super grimdark series. It would be extremely challenging to turn Redwall into anything resembling grimdark. Really,
it'd be hard to mess it up.
If you did that, it would be Watership Down.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Was there a sequel to The Secret of Nim? Or was it just the standalone? I really liked how dark that one was.
I think there was.
There may have been, but I'm not familiar with it because it was a completed, wrapped up story. So
yeah, it's just great.
There was a sequel to Watership Down, which is
they remade it on Netflix.
Surprising. Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. Watch good stuff and read Terry Pratchett, and those are good for your kids.
Time.
If you want something that's not safe for kids but also not bad, read Gunmetal Gods.
It's on my list now.
Gunmetal Gods. It's a Middle Eastern cosmic horror fantasy. It's nuts. And the 3rd book of the trilogy dropped last month, and I haven't read it because it's not an audiobook yet for a couple.
Kind of sounds like a Neil Gaiman book almost, like a book, not a comic, where he gets into some of that stuff.
It's wonderful, really good. Can't recommend it enough. Very dark horror. He does like the Eldritch horror stuff really well because that's hard to write about, right? Because by definition, it's indescribable. And so what he does in these books is he uses metaphors that we are used to. And then halfway through the book, you realize, oh, no, he's not talking about angels in the way that I think of angels. He's talking about cosmic horrors, but they're using the word angels because that's what they have in their vocabulary. And you slowly start realizing, oh no, this is horrible. This is really bad, and it's really good, cool stuff. So, but also read Discworld. That's it.
More importantly, read Discworld.
I think we've given a few reasons on why that would be a great idea.
Because Discworld helped me get through Gunmetal Gods because I was messed up when I finished it. And then I read something fun, and then I read the sequel to Gunmetal Gods, and I was messed up again, and then I read Discworld. Okay? Read both. You guys have anything else to say? I feel like this is a good place to end the stream.
No, I got nothing else.
This is my first time doing a live stream with my face on it, so hey,
Hey,
you know,
well,
this has
it's
been fun.
super fun talking to you guys. Right.
Thanks for having us, man. This has been a blast. I'd be happy to do it again. Let us know.
We'll read more books and we'll do it. Okay. Well, let's call it there. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us. It's been super fun. And read more books. That's the end of the show. I'm pushing the button now.
And now it is time to say goodbye.
We had a great conversation.
It's been fun. But all good things must come to an end, and the goodest ending I can think of is...
Right now, this moment, this night.
So I guess we just say goodbye.
So, goodbye.
Toodaloo. Au revoir. Auf Wiedersehen. Ciao. Ding dao day. But come back next week for more outrageous bloopers.
This is the end.
Well, there's only one thing left to do.
I'm gonna go home and sleep with my wife.